Hello everybody and welcome back. Tonight I want to go over a very brief video about the history of St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, and Kris Kringle. This is something that's been interesting to me because I knew there was a religious aspect to it, but I didn't realize how far back this history went. So, St. Nicholas was actually the origin story for everything else. And he was a real monk that lived in what we would now today call the Turkey area. And he's a way the history is a little bit garbled because you can read one story where it says he was born in 400 AD, another one will say he was born in 275. So sometime between 275 and 400 AD is when he lived. And his name was actually Saint Nicholas of Myra is how he was sainted. And he passed away on December 6th. Again, the year is up for debate because there's not really an accurate description there. But his body, because of the generosity he showed in life, became venerated and eventually was transferred to, I believe, somewhere in Italy. It depends on, again, which story. There's another one of the histories that said they actually, parts of his body, his bone structure was scattered throughout the Europe because of, as a relic to venerate him. So, his popularity grew even after his death, though. During his life, there were miracles surrounding him, including stopping violent storms to save sailors who were basically going to crash into the rocks. He donated money for dowries to keep young families and young women in particular from being sold into the oldest employment. And he also... And this legend is interesting to me because of how common this practice really became through centuries. There was a story associated with St. Nicholas where a butcher had dismembered 3 young males and stuffed their bodies into a barrel and brined them like to pickled pork. And there's a whole bunch of different stories starting from around this time between 275 and 400 AD, all the way up through the last 50 years or so, where people have done this particular action. It's disturbing, but it's not that uncommon. But the legend that goes along with this particular story is that while they were in their brine and in pieces, St. Nicholas was able to pray over the barrel, and all 3 children came back out of the barrel fully alive and back to normal. So his massive generosity to young people, especially the children, the really young kids, and his need to help sailors made him actually the patron saint of children and sailors, amongst a few other additions tossed in there, which I found was an interesting combination because there's not a lot of matchups between children and sailors, but, who knows. Over time, his fame spread throughout Europe. People were using his bones, like I said earlier, as relics, and as those relics moved around, which is how a lot of saints became so popular, the story of his life spread as well and also became very fictionalized. Some legends say his story got mixed up with aspects of the elves and fairies from the Germanic and Northern European cultures, and that included being able to fly through the air in various machinery or chariots or however you want to call it for the time. And it was in this time with the Northern European tribes that he acquired the name Santa Claus, which is an old man dressed in red clerical robes. Completely lost the word, and I didn't write it down. With the white beard that we see today. And it was shortly after, well, not shortly, probably a few years after this, in the early 1800s, when the depiction changed from being a more lean, robust type person to the more jolly, portly man that we know today. Over time, the legend had been defined by Washington Irving, who was a prolific writer in his day, in his writing called The History of New York, which was written around 1809. And then in 1823, the very, very classic poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is one of my favorites, and they did a really cool animated version, I believe in the 70s, and that was written by Clement Clark Moore. Moore's biggest basically change and addition to the original story was, instead of having this random flying chariot just zipping around up there, he added the use of 8 tiny reindeer pulling the sleigh. And then by around, and I don't use exact dates because you get into this argument over, well, no, that's not right, so I don't use exact dates. But around 1879, a cartoonist named Thomas Nash he took the Jolly St. Nicholas that we started to understand as today's Santa Claus, but he took them out of the Middle East and tossed them into the North Pole to continue his magical work from the top, in his view of it, of the planet. So basically it was easier for him to see what was going on. And then moving forward even further, there was an iconic beverage company, and I'm not using the name for reasons, brought us the more modern version of the fluffy saint around 1931, which has through history been tweaked and adjusted, adding in polar bears. That should give it away as to who I'm talking about now. But the origin of this beverage company's version of St. Nicholas or Santa Claus was around 1931, and that was created by the illustrator Haddon Sundblom, which is a very weird name. When I looked it up, I thought it was a misspelling until I googled it, and that's his name, Haddon, which that part's not the weird part. Sundblom was the weird one, Sundblum. Okay. Then what we now see as our department store Santa Claus was actually first portrayed in the movie Miracle on 34th Street, and that's also where we were introduced to the term Kris Kringle, and that was around 1947. And I have to say, there are very few movies that I just don't like, and that's one of them, and it has nothing to do with the actors. The individual actors in that movie, I love. Same thing with It's a Wonderful Life. The individual actors, I love. The actual story, not so much. And it's a personal thing, and I haven't really enjoyed those movies ever. Like, from day one, I have not enjoyed them. Even the remakes of Miracle on 34th Street that was done in the 90s, not my story, not something I like. So that's just me, my weird opinion on it. But with the Miracle on 34th Street, it brought us the term Kris Kringle, kind of the first pop culture reference to him. Just one second. I'm recording this early enough in the day I shouldn't be tired, but for some reason I'm just like kind of drained right now. Anyway, and now this comes to the third name, the name that I just mentioned, Kris Kringle. And according to what I was digging up, because the other ones I knew some of the history of, like I had an idea of where Santa Claus came from. I had an idea that it was a shifted name from St. Nicholas. Didn't realize how much of a change, but I knew that Santa and Saint were similar. But Kris Kringle was one that I've heard for years and had no idea where it came from. I mean, if you've watched the old Rankin and Bass stop motion one, the Kringles were the jolly elves in the forest that saved the little baby Claus from the whispering winds of the winter woods, and somber town and all of that. But actually, it's way more spiritual than that, and I didn't realize this. Kris Kringle is said to be the British translation of a Pennsylvania German, and this was a kind of a Dutch area, but they use the reference to Kris Kringle, which sounds weird, but it's kind of the direct translation of it was Christ kind or Christ child. So the way they view it is this is the literal interpretation of the baby Jesus coming back to visit us, not the adult version, but the child. So the term Kris Kringle actually holds a spiritual connotation more so than the other ones do, because St. Nicholas was a human man. Santa Claus is a mythological being that was basically came from that name. But the version Kris Kringle is really actually referencing the Christian Jesus Christ. And the thing that I found interesting is when I was kind of rooting around in it, the term Kris Kringle and the associated imagery with it, which I'll get into in a minute, hold their spiritual connection to this day versus St. Nicholas and Santa Claus that have become rather commercialized across the, the intervening centuries. But Kris Kringle, when referenced directly from the Pennsylvania German groups, are talking about a dusty, blonde, winged, childlike angel that is the manifestation of Jesus into the world. He comes in secretly to bless children who have been good with gifts, candies, and goodies. But the children, this is a key part of Kris Kringle, and it's bled over, as far as my view of it, into the other stories of Santa Claus and St. Nicholas. The children are not allowed to see Kris Kringle when he comes through, or he will remove the presents that he's left, or not leave them if he hasn't left them yet. Legend says that this is where the story of hanging stockings by the fire really is based in the Kris Kringle stories. You don't really find reference to it in any of the Santa Claus history. You don't find it in St. Nicholas's history, but it's tied directly to Kris Kringle's history. So, and part of the story with Kris Kringle was in the morning, one of the parents would secretly ring a bell, like a reindeer bell if you want to call it that, and allow the children to know that the Kris Kringle had left, because his sign of leaving the house was a gentle ringing of a bell as he left, which would then tell the children they were allowed to come out, and presents and food and the usual holiday chaos would ensue. So it's interesting to go through a lot of this history, because in the grand scheme of things, how much do we really think about the purpose and the meaning of what Christmas is, of what Yule is? Amongst the pagans and the Druids, they still look at Yule as this rebirthing of the sun, the planet, our star sun, and the returning of the masculine god energy into the planet to revitalize us. And that holds a very strong spiritual connection. And they have always held that to show your joy and your abundance, if you will, from receiving these gifts, or this gift from the divine, you give a gift in return. So you give your gifts to each other. In the modern interpretation of Christmas itself, which is, like I said, it's they swiped the day from the pagans and adjusted the time frame, trying to draw people away from the 21st, and they put it on the 25th. The thing that I've noticed is, even amongst different churches, and I explored a little bit in my younger days, just trying to get how different churches celebrate different holidays. They've gotten away from what the spirit of Christmas was originally meant to be. It was to be a period of rejoicing that the Son, S-O-N or S-U-N, depending on pagan or Christian, is returning to the world to save us from darkness. In a lot of the cultures, the pagan cultures, it's the returning of the sun god to basically break out of the fear and the darkness of the underworld. And in the Christian version, it was the Son of God coming to earth to save the souls of humanity. That would mean that this holiday has very, very strong spiritual connection to it. But how many people look at that? In today's world, like I said, I try to look at things through the realm of spirit or politics, but I'm not doing that here. And with this concept of spirit, how many people look at the fact that this holiday, that we go and put up the tree and put up the decorations and spend way too much money on gifts for people we barely know or barely see, or fill in the blank. Why do you do that? Do you do it to be like, I have to keep up with the Joneses, in which case you have lost the entire plot here? Or do you do it out of, I appreciate this person being in my life and I want to show my thanks to them by granting them a gift? Even if you get nothing in return, it's the simple fact of you want to let them know that you appreciate them. The soup kitchens, and a lot of people I know will actually do the soup kitchen thing on Christmas Day. They'll go out, instead of having the big humongous chaos of Christmas dinner, they'll go and do soup kitchen stuff. They'll volunteer during this weekend or whenever the holiday falls, and it's their way of giving back. It's their way of showing gratitude, and it's a way to show generosity that doesn't always have to involve finances. During this time, just something to think about, look at what the spirit of the holiday means. It was meant to be a celebration of children in a lot of ways, if you're going with the St. Nicholas one. It was a period to be generous, not to the point of pain. Obviously, you don't want to go that far, but showing generosity doesn't always mean financial. Inviting friends over for dinner, volunteering at a charity, things like that are part of being generous. And then the flip side of that generosity is be grateful. Look around you. If you're with your family during this holiday, look at how big and how warm the family is. It doesn't matter if you have issues with, old goofy aunt over there or the grumpy uncle. They're there to be supportive of each other, even if they don't understand all of it. But you can look at that as you can take that as gratitude as well. Be grateful for those people, because you wouldn't be in the position you are without them. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But even if it's bad, you can learn from it and grow from it, so it's really not that bad. But whether you're with friends or with family, however it works for you, take a couple of minutes and think about what you have to be grateful for. In the United States, we're grateful at Thanksgiving, but this is another time, and this one has a much longer worldwide association with it, and it's about joy, it's about gratitude, it's about sharing who you are and yourself with those around you, and it's also a time to thank God, Source Divine, for all of the gifts that you've given, and kind of showing a little bit of gratitude that direction as well. We've all been given a lot to be grateful for, so just a couple of thoughts to think about. And on that note, I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas tomorrow and a Happy New Year. And I'm dropping this on Christmas Eve, that's the reason I say that. And I'll talk to you guys in a future video, and have a Merry Christmas.